Hello everybody and welcome to the second part of my short demonstration of Debricked and the short introduction into the tool. Now I want to follow up with a brief demo and show you the functionalities that we are offering within our tool. So right now we're on our website, so if we go to log in, you then have the option to either log in with normal email credentials, or you can log in with your GitHub account that is logged in on the same browser. I always do that because I'm just liking the easeability of that, but that's absolutely up to you. So the first page that everybody sees when opening our tool and opening it in our UI is the repository page. On this page alone, you find a lot of information. So first of all, you got this little table here where all of your repositories where Debricked is implemented will be shown by the name, also the total count of vulnerabilities, vulnerability priority, meaning critical with a CVSS score between 9 and 10 and high between 7 and 9. And then the review status that you can set manually or through our automations, where I haven't set anything by now. So there are 0 vulnerable marked, 0 marked to be paused or snoozed from the rules, and 0 marked as unaffected. But I will go into that in a short second. Moreover, what you can do here is you can create teams. Within a team, you can have several repositories that are like combined in the team. And you can also combine teams within teams. So team 1 and team 2 are part of team 3, but team 3 is also checking out repositories that haven't been part of team 1 and team 2. So this is basically the only way within our tool to create a structure, a hierarchical structure, and to work from your team's perspective. Yes, so because we will find it more often, but on the repository page it is different than on the license page. You can generate a report here on the top right corner, and this will give you an overview of all the repositories that have been, where Debricked has been implemented, and the total amount of vulnerabilities and also the priority. So basically an exportable report of the view that you also get here in the repository view. From this repository view, we could just jump into one of the repositories directly. Again, you will find the Generate Report button here, which will now not generate an overall report for several repositories and giving you basic information about the vulnerabilities, but rather it will generate a report where you will find all the licenses that are in this repository and all the dependencies attached to each and every license, and you will get a lot of other information. So it is in that sense a complete SBOM about all the open source dependencies that are being used within that repository. You can by now get it as an Excel file if you generate it through our UI, but via an API call you can also get it in the CycloneDX format, which we are currently developing and pushing forward because it's going to be more or less the standard of the whole industry to get reports, exportable reports in the CycloneDX format. So on this page, you already have a link to our automations, which I will show you in a few minutes. You can invite users again, you can generate a report, as I said. You can open up a pull request, and if you remember from the presentation that I showed you in the first video, a pull request here means that we would do a root fix if possible for JavaScript dependencies, so npm for example. We'll do a root fix, and with that upgrading the vulnerable dependency and all the transitive dependencies to the non-vulnerable and least highest upgradable version, so that you don't introduce too many breaking changes, and no breaking changes are going to be introduced through the upgrading itself, so through incompatibility issues. On our repository view, where we'll find all the vulnerabilities that are inside this one and only repository, you will get the information about the common vulnerability enumerator, so the identifier of this vulnerability. You will find information on when it was discovered in your code base, not when the vulnerability itself was discovered. You will find the CVSS score. So this one would be a very critical CVE. And if we just turn it around, we will find kind of medium and lower CVEs and vulnerabilities therefore. Then you will have an overview of all the dependencies that are being used, or the dependency in which the vulnerability was introduced. You will also find the package manager in this information, and you will get the review status that I haven't set yet. So if we then just jump one layer down again and go into one of the vulnerabilities, you will get a lot of different information here. First of all, you will get basic information that we gather from different databases. So here you will find a description of the vulnerability by the National Vulnerability Database, and here you will find a description of the vulnerability by the GitHub Security Advisory. So to say, those are the two main databases where we will find most of the vulnerabilities. But we are currently using or comparing your dependency files to over 20 databases, and NVD and GitHub, I must say, are just the most common ones. So I haven't conquered some a vulnerability without an entry in NVD or GitHub. But just to be sure and just to fulfill every niche, we do have a lot of different other databases as well, which we update at least every half an hour. And then we will update also your repositories or our findings in your repositories. So if something changes, either vulnerability or also license-wise, those changes will show within the UI or within your API calls. We then have the CVSS free score that is also shown in the UI, the page before, a CVSS 2 score, and the Debricked AI. So you can here now set review statuses for this vulnerability within that repo where we came from. So now we're looking at repo 1. You can mark this vulnerability as unaffected, so you basically do not really care about it. You can mark it as vulnerable, so you do really care about it and you want to find a solution for it. And you can pause the rule triggering, referring to our policy automations, so that if we later will apply rules and look at the rules, for example, a CVSS score higher than, or a CVSS score that is critical, so higher than 9 and until 10, then you should fail the pipeline. But maybe for this specific vulnerability, even though it has a CVSS free score of 9.8, you don't want this rule to be triggered, so you don't want the pipeline to fail. You then can set the review status as pause rule triggering, and then you can avoid the failing of the pipeline for this vulnerability. Here we'll have the open the pull request functionality again, where you can try, if there is a possible fix, with updating the vulnerabilities, where you can try to solve them by updating them. And here you will find an overview yet again about what the transitive dependency is that first introduced the vulnerable dependency, and here you will get the information about the vulnerable dependency and which version you have here. Below that you will find another information that says that every version earlier than 3.1.7, so after 2.5.7 to 3.1.7, everything in between is not vulnerable, and by updating to something in between or updating to the 3.1.7, you could potentially solve this vulnerability. So this is basically looking very much the same for every vulnerability with different information, of course. So we can now jump into our vulnerability page on the left-hand side. On this page, you will find all vulnerabilities that have been discovered in your code base. So not not sorted by your different repositories, but rather having an overview of all vulnerabilities, where you can go through, have an overview, see the dependencies they're in, and have all the information that we already discussed in the previous pages. We go further down on the left hand side, we will find a dependency view that gives you all the dependencies that are within the implemented repositories. So all those dependencies are part of my three different repositories, more or less. You will then see the name of the dependency, the total amount of vulnerabilities for this dependency, the priority yet again, the review status yet again, and first for now you will see the license that is applied to this very dependency. And this is the first time that we see the licenses as well, but you get the information here as well. And if you recall from my presentation, we do not only offer the basic SCA tool parts by showing you about the licenses, showing you about the vulnerabilities. That's something that we kind of covered already. But we are also looking at the community health behind the project. In that sense, at the moment, as I said, we have popularity and contributor applied to every dependency that we are supporting for the languages that we are supporting. And the popularity score basically, as I said, like to just put it easy, saying how popular is a certain dependency, how often is it downloaded, how popular has it been in the last 3 months, how likely is it that this is something that is still in any sense relevant. That's one indicator of how good the community or how good or sustainable in that sense a project is. But the other way to look at it is the contributor score. And the contributor score says or gives you information, indicates of how good or how well working the contributors behind the open source project are. So both numbers in combination give you a very good estimate and indication about how sustainable this project is going to be also in the future. So if we look at all of those different dependencies, you will find this one with a score of 28 and the popularity is maybe not the most relevant one, and maybe it makes sense to just look out for a new open source dependency that fulfills the same job and doesn't give you any other problems, of course, but has better score in case of popularity. And if this is something that is interesting, I will show you in a few bullet points, more or less, how we can achieve this by staying even within our UI. But firstly, I want to just go down one more step on the left-hand side, going down to our license view. And within our license view, you will find all the names of the different licenses that we've found in your repositories. You will here have an overview of the license risk that we apply to those different licenses. You will get the affected overview of the affected repositories, so repo 2, repo 1. How many dependencies you have that are having this license and what license family it is. Determine the license risk correctly for each and every license. It is not only relevant what license you have in your code base, but it is also very relevant what you're doing with the repository where the license is being held. So for example, if you have an internal repo and you do not commercialize that code whatsoever, that software, then you do not really care about the license, because the license is not going to be commercialized and you will not have any problems by not doing that, since it is still open source. So what could happen with a strong copyleft license, HGPL is a good example for that, is that if you try to commercialize the code where you will find such a license, is that every single part of the code that touches this license need to be open sourced as well. Fix this issue, you could go into manage on the left hand side, go to repositories and commits, and then you will find here the little part of the use case, where you can now decide how is the repository used. Is it only internal use only? Then in that sense, we don't, or our tool doesn't really care about this license or this repository with that license, because it's not giving you any risk whatsoever. then you can choose to have it as a SaaS or a web application, which could then have a different part of licensing or different part of commercializing than, for example, something that you download as an app or on the phone or a desktop application or whatever. And the last thing that we divide to is to hardware that is shipped out with software on it, like a GPS system, for example. Those are the three different commercializing paths that we see and that you can choose from to determine the license risk most correctly for your repositories. So if we now go down on the left hand side, and if you remember in the dependency view we found the popularity and contributor score, which is a nice overview, nice indicator of how well maintained, well sustainable a product may be in the future. But if you see it in this dependency view, this is great information, and it's good to have this information afterwards. But isn't it, or wouldn't it be more valuable for anybody to have this information even before introducing a new package, a new dependency into your code base, into your project? For this, we have developed our open source select, which is currently in alpha. This is basically a complete clone of GitHub. So having all the open source projects that you can find on GitHub also within our open source select. And what we are doing here is basically having a search engine where you can search contextualized and also by name or functionality to find a package, a project or a part of open source software that fits your purposes, and not only fits your purposes from the standpoint of, I don't know, searching for a JSON parser, but then also having the possibility to compare those directly. So if I just take those three that aren't looking too good in our popularity and contributor score, you will then get this nice overview and you will have a direct comparison through the popularity and contributor score. And if you go even more down, you will have this metric here for the contributor score. You can also have it for the popularity score. You will find how good one of those projects has worked out in the different fields. So Ecosystem Bus, for example, the Flathead is winning easily against JSON2S and also Sourceify. In the contributor score, it is also Flathead who is having the best core team commitment, and you can then decide on what you want to look the most, what is most important for you, to decide whether you want to have it in your code, whether it is sustainable, or how you want to work with it. And you could do this even before introducing that. So you could use this open source select search engine as part of your development process, but in the beginning, shifting left for that matter, and only introducing dependencies with good or sufficient enough popularity and contributors scores. And what we want to do is to combine this open source select with our automations, but that isn't there yet. But I will show you how our automations that I already discussed a lot on side notes. I want to show you how our automations work, because it's a very easy, intuitive, and great way to enforce company guidelines onto the developers without the developers really noticing, and especially without the developers needing to do anything. So they don't need to adapt until a certain matter, of course. They don't need to adapt and need to read every single line of the README files to know whether they are allowed or not, or to check with your information security officer if they can introduce this package or this dependency. And with all of that falling away, you can add a lot of efficiency to the development process. So first of all, we have some rules that are added automatically, but you can of course either delete them, toggle them away in that sense to deactivate the rules, or you can create new rules, of course. You can apply those rules to different repositories, so you can really decide what repository should have what guidelines, because maybe you're using them for different ways. And then you have a lot of possibilities on how to generate different rules. First of all, the structure is quite easy in if then statement. So if a condition is fulfilled, then a certain outcome will be given. You can extend the if statements with logical ands and also with logical ors. But let's jump right into it. If we, for example, have the company guideline, you're not allowed to introduce a CVSS that is at least critical. And maybe this dependency needs to be new because, and that's something that we often suggest, if you would integrate Debricked to your projects now right away, you will find a lot of vulnerabilities. That's just how it is. And if you then want to scan continuously and set up those rules, you will run into problems because you will have a lot of vulnerabilities already, and you maybe just don't want to get any new ones because you already know about the old ones, but you haven't had time yet to remediate all of them or look through all of them. So maybe this is a good extra condition to ensure that this is just for the development process from now on. If you want so, this is just a suggestion that we often give. And if the CVSS is at least critical, so the vulnerability is at least critical, and the dependency is introduced as a new dependency, then you can do different things. You can fail the pipeline, you can throw out a pipeline warning, you can notify a user by email, a user group by email, you can mark them as unaffected. If you don't care about such a vulnerability, you can flag them as vulnerable. Again, if you want to really have a close look into them and to push the remediation of this certain vulnerability, or you can trigger a webhook, creating Jira tickets, throwing out Slack notifications, or whatever you are using, if it's supported. So then to fail the pipeline is normally a very harsh and very strict rule. So we often again suggest to throw out a pipeline warning or a flag as vulnerable for such a critical vulnerability. But that really depends on how you want to work with it. And sometimes you need to work your head around that and just check how good is that working, how many notifications is that throwing out, and all of this is a process, right? So this isn't set in stone. You can always adapt and to recreate and also adapt to the certain circumstances, of course. So now this rule would be generated, and it would say that if a newly added dependency contains a vulnerability which has not been marked as unaffected, where the CVSS is at least critical, so between 9 and 10, then flag vulnerability as vulnerable. I could now save this rule. It has this little bug here because we want to flag something as vulnerable. And now all of the free repositories that I have added will have this rule applied to. I can now deactivate the rule, I can edit the rule, and I can, of course, just delete the rule. And that's how easy it is. So you would need to sit down, you would need to think about the company guidelines, what you want to enforce, how you want to enforce it, and you can then basically work all of those rules with our policy automations, because we can not only refer to the CVSS, so the vulnerabilities, but you can also refer to the license families, the license risk. That is, of course, again, determined by the different use cases. So a very straightforward and intuitive way of enforcing the company guidelines. And something we want to add here is, for example, the health option. So you don't want a dependency introduced that has a popularity score that is lower than 50. I'm just throwing out numbers, but something like that. And also then to apply this to the open source select. So if your developers would search inside the open source select for certain dependencies, they won't get shown, for example, or only like grayed out. They will get shown the different dependencies that don't fulfill the requirements that are set by the information security officer or whoever sets this up. So we want to have this automation apply to all the three different legs, as I already talked about it in the presentation, and to have it from the very first step of the development, so the search for a certain dependency, a certain project, until the end where you review and remediate. So this should be applied to all the different steps. And Yes, this is our tool. We do have, actually, I'm always saying the repository page is our first page, and it is the first page everybody will get shown, but we do have an overview that is currently in beta. And this is basically giving you an overview of all the repositories that are currently in your, like where Debricked is implemented. So right now I'm having 67 vulnerabilities overall. Of those, you can find 17 as critical, 25 high, 19 medium, 0 low, and 5 are actually unknown because maybe there is no data. What normally should happen is that this should be declining. This shouldn't be a flat curve because, of course, you start to remediate vulnerabilities, and this is a good way to track the success of sometimes also different teams or different repositories on how good they are working on the remediation, thus creating competition within the different teams and within the different repository managers to just see how many are they solving, how many am I solving, and in the best and in an utopia probably you will all have a flat line at the zero at some point. And we are looking forward to show you the total fixed vulnerabilities here and the license risks, the overall here, but this is also coming soon. Also, the overview is in beta, and that's why it is not the first page that gets shown. So yes, we do have different user settings and different things, but those are not really functionalities of the tool of how we are doing the SCA stuff. These are more in-depth admin requirements probably. So yeah, I would like to stop it for now. Thank you for all your attention. If you have any questions, please come back to me or to anybody of our team. We're always happy to help you out. And yeah, I hope this was informative. And see you soon. Bye.